Well, here we are telling the story of my life, and I'm almost 90 years old now. I was born in 1932 in Mankato and lived there my early life. Grew up on Glenwood Avenue, which was a great place to grow up. Ran up and down all those hills. The kids had caves, and we could dig into that soft clay and make them bigger. None of them ever went more than a couple feet into the hillside. But in those days, there wasn't a lot of traffic on Glenwood. I remember playing ball in the middle of the road, which you sure wouldn't do today. When I was 8 years old, I got sick. And none of the doctors, it was Dr. Carney, who was new to town, who told my folks, I don't know what's wrong with her. I kept blacking out. And so he said, I think you better take her down to Mayo Clinic in Rochester. And I kind of remember being in the back seat of the car laying down, and then I don't remember anything for 3 days. I had sleeping sickness, and that was an epidemic that summer around southern Minnesota and other places of the country. Who knew that I would hit another epidemic, the polio epidemic in the 40s, and then we got a shot or something for that. I remember drinking it. And then came COVID, which is active right now. So far, I've had my shots and a booster shot, and I'm still healthy. Rochester was 2 weeks in a great big building next to St. Mary's where nobody could come in because we were in isolation. My poor mother stood out on the street practically, looking up at the second floor window where I was for 2 weeks. She had a sore neck for several months after. They didn't have any money back then, and there was no hospital insurance. My dad paid $5 every month. Every month he sent $5 to Mayo Clinic, and it was paid when I graduated from high school in 1950. I think that's unheard of today. But Rochester charged you kind of by what you could afford. And doctors have told me since, you're one of the lucky ones. So many people had things left over from that encephalitis, and it didn't affect your brain or your walking or anything else. I suppose we'll keep having these epidemics, but believe me, my advice if you ever hit one is go get the shots, follow the science. Well, I could not have gone to college, which was a real break for me, if we hadn't lived on Glenwood Avenue, 417 Glenwood. I could walk about 2 blocks down the street, and there was Mankato Teachers College. When I was in high school, I didn't even think about going to college, but about a week before I graduated, somebody came from the college and talked about a 2 year teaching course. And because I lived so close, I could live at home and go. My part time jobs were Woolworths, and I got 35 cents an hour there. After 3 years part time at Woolworths, I was making 38 cents an hour. Increases weren't real big. I also worked at um, Alpine Attic, which was a youth center, helping Mrs. Adams, and that was on the second floor of the downtown YMCA. Sometimes I helped in my grandma's store too. We owned Enfield's confectionery store, which was on the corner of Rock and Front Street. I went to work there when I was 11 years old, learned how to make change, and you always counted back the change for people. Nobody does that today. Uh, college was fun, but I knew I didn't have a lot of time to graduate. And I soon decided, because I didn't have any younger brothers or sisters, that I didn't want to work with little kids. I wanted to work with high school and junior high age kids. That was a 4-year degree. So I went 3 summers, and in 1953, I got my Bachelor of Science degree in history. Well, by this time, I was married and Bob was in Korea, and we had Greg. So I was kind of an at home mom and really not ready to go out and start teaching. So we lived in college housing, which was the Avoca apartment house right down from Old Main's entrance. Um, one time, the college owned that building, and one time it had been my speech class, in which later was my living room. Well, I was working on an advanced degree, a master's degree, and MSU, well, at that time it was a teacher's college, only gave it in education. I have the third one that they ever gave out. One man graduated in January, and myself and another fellow in June. So kind of neat having one of the first master's degrees ever given out by MSU. Then I taught 1 year at St. Clair, which was a junior high remedial reading and spelling and social studies, and high school a speech class and 10th grade English and 12th grade English. To this day, the seniors that year, every year, ask me to their reunion, and I always go. So it's been a long time keeping track of the kids I knew at St. Clair. We moved to the Minneapolis area because Bob wanted to go to Dunwoody. And I didn't want to sign a teaching contract because I thought, what if he doesn't like it and we want to move back to Mankato before I even finish the year? I went to the state employment office and got an unusual job. It was teaching blind people at the Minneapolis Society for the Blind, and I was to teach typing. I typed probably 50, 60 words a minute. So I thought, well, this won't be too hard. These were newly blinded people who wanted to learn to type so they could send a letter to somebody or keep in touch with a friend. People don't send letters today, but we did back in the 1950s. Imagine me teaching a 60-year-old farmer who had been blinded in an accident how to type when his fingers were large and didn't work very well. I put a piece of tape on the two main keys and pretty soon had the fellow typing the home row and then adding a key. And it was fun to see people be able to write simple letters to their friends. We also taught travel training, took people on bus trips. I was there 5 years, and I'll never forget some of the people I met. Now we had our second son, Grant, and it was time to move out into the suburbs and buy a house, which we did in Bloomington. It was on 8033 Fremont Avenue South. Little 3-bedroom rambler. Interesting place to live because 35W was on one side of the house and 494 on the other. I lived in the house closest to that intersection. The thing about it was airplanes never went over our house because they weren't supposed to go over the freeways. Well, everybody in Bloomington complained about airplane noise. I heard some traffic, but we got used to it. And it was kind of neat living there. We could go any direction on the highway in a fairly short time. Bob finished at Dunwoody and eventually got a job at Erickson Petroleum Company. And he worked 33 years for the Erickson family. And he also was a construction supervisor building Holiday gas stations in 5 states. When we went on a trip, we didn't just go from town to town. We went from Holiday Station to Holiday Station so he could check them out. It was a good job for him. They had profit sharing. And when I went looking for a job, there was a little company called Rosemount Incorporated right in Bloomington that was looking for a secretary. Well, by this time I was out of public school teaching, and I thought, well, I'll do this for a few years and then see what happens. So here I am with a master's degree as a secretary to the fellow who was the Human Resources Department, or personnel as we called it then. There were about 150, maybe 175 people in this company when I went there, and they made aircraft instruments, pedostatic tubes, ice detectors, this kind of thing for airplanes. Wasn't very long, maybe 6 months or so, when he said to me, we're really growing. You're going to have to start hiring people. Never hired anyone in my life, but I said, well, I'll try and see what I can do. By the time I left 25 years later, I had hired over 3,000 people. He had 6,000 worldwide. One time I had to put on a night shift. 100 people they needed in a couple weeks. We did it. I hired 100 people in 2 weeks and had them all working. Wasn't too long there. I was there 25 years. And the thing about the profit sharing was, with a successful company and a lot of money going into our profit sharing every year, I could retire at 55. And that's another story. Back to Rosemount. The last 10 years I worked there, they needed somebody in the security department, someone to fingerprint people and to get them security clearances and to hang on to the classified documents, which were confidential and marked secret. I never did anything like this. Here I was in a locked room with 7 or 8 big safes full of classified documents. Every 6 months, you had to change the combination on every safe and on the door, and you couldn't write it down anywhere. How in the world was I going to do that? Well, one of the engineers helped me, and he said, we'll pick a number like 11. So the first number will be 11, and then we'll go up 8 more, and then 8 again, and then back 8, and then to 0. And that's what I did for 10 years with all those safes. And I never had one that we had to drill open. We always had them work, which was a big accomplishment. After 10 years, 25 years at Rosemount, and 10 years of, honestly, by that time I had spies coming in the ceiling. So at night I was dreaming things. I thought, I got to get out of this job. And we had bought a lake lot at Madison Lake back when Bob first came home from Korea. I had a little $1,000 insurance policy that came due on me, and we decided to buy a lake lot. It was $700 on Madison Lake. And a year or so later, we bought the one next door for $800. That 150 feet on Madison Lake was our saving grace over the years, because it was a place to go and raise our 2 boys and the fun that we had. We couldn't get away for long vacations with the jobs we had, but we could always go to the lake on a weekend, or a week here, a week there, and both boys enjoyed the lake. It was a good time of life. We had a lot of friends. Some of them you probably either heard me talk about or you've heard your dads and mothers talk about because they're longtime friends, the kind that you keep for 50, 60 years and more. But then disaster struck. Right after I decided to retire, Bob came home one day. He had gone to the doctor because he wasn't walking well. And the doctor said, "You have Parkinson's disease." He had an uncle with the same thing that had died a horrible death. Fortunately, Cinnamate or L-Dopa was developed about this time. And by the time he got the disease, Cinnamate, this pill, kept him going about 20 years. He wanted to work, and he worked till he was 59, but finally said, "I just can't keep all the balls in the air anymore. It's time to retire." It was a good thing that I retired at 55 and moved to the lake, because then we got to travel and do some things before he finally just couldn't do them anymore. The last year he was in a nursing home and couldn't move anything. Couldn't feed himself. He couldn't even turn the TV to a different channel. So how that big 6'3" man laid there for a whole year and really never complained, I'll never know. He was a good man. I guess the next thing that I did to keep myself sane over those years when we retired was being a history major and having relatives all over Blue Earth County in this area. I was interested in going to the Blue Earth County Historical Society, and I volunteered there. Well, till today, I still do a few things. For most of that time, I clipped newspapers and obituaries and pasted in the obituary books for a good 25 years. That'll be a legacy that I left forever. Yeah, if you go in the Historical Society and look at any of the old newspapers, there's my handwriting on the date on every single one of them. I'm probably most proud of that and hiring all those people at Rosemount for big events for over the years. Excuse me. The Daughters of the American Revolution is one organization I always thought I would like to join. I tried for 35 years to get in the Daughters of the American Revolution. My Enfield side goes way back to Maryland before the United States was even formed. But there was one great-great-great-grandfather that I could never figure out where he died or where he was buried. And you have to be able to keep track of everybody. So I gave up, and years went by. And one day a lady called and said, "They have researchers now that'll help with your family tree." So I sent in my father's side. My mother was a Gunther, and she also had relatives, great-grandfathers, who came here, but they came after statehood for Minnesota in 1858. My Enfield relatives were here before statehood. I didn't think there was a chance with her German background that there would ever be anybody there. Well, lo and behold, the researcher in California emailed me one day and said, "What do you know about this, your mother's great-grandfather who came from St. Louis, Missouri, and who was married to a woman whose ancestors were here real early?" It turns out Mr. Villars, a Frenchman, I don't know how you really pronounce it, fought in the militia in St. Louis to keep the Spanish from taking over the St. Louis area, because if the United States was formed, they wanted to be part of the English part of the country. Even the Louisiana Purchase wasn't until 1803. And here he was before 1776. Lo and behold, I'm suddenly in the Daughters of the American Revolution. So I tell people, don't ever give up when you're doing your genealogy, because you will never guess what can happen. It's kind of fun to go to DAR things where people are talking about their patriot in North Carolina or Maine or Maryland. My patriot comes from Missouri, and that's almost unheard of. I know if you look back at old pictures, you're going to see a lot of things we did over the years, and especially things at the lake. Madison Lake is a great place to live and grow up. I enjoyed the birds. I enjoyed the seasons. When I finally knew it was time to move into Mankato, I had to see water. So I bought into Willowbrook Cooperative, and I've lived here almost 6 years now. And I look at Glenwood Pond. This morning, there were 50 some geese out there. I also saw a rabbit, a squirrel. I have seen deer. One morning, a fox ran through the backyard. So it's a fun place to live. I've made lots of good friends. And I hope I make my 90th birthday next July 7th. It's been a good life. I thought of one more thing I want to be sure and mention. You're looking at this probably years from now when I recorded it in 2021. I want you to be sure with the technology today that you're saving your keepsakes, especially pictures. People tell me, oh, I have all my pictures on cloud, I'm saving them. Well, some people used to put pictures on film, the big old projectors. We don't have those anymore. There's nothing like printing some off, getting some actual pictures. Be sure you write on them someplace on the back lightly, who's in the picture, the date of the picture, what it is. I'm afraid we're going to lose some of this simply because people don't realize how fragile pictures are. I know one time my aunt, Phyllis George, was cleaning out a closet. And I suppose I was 9, 10 years old. And she was throwing pictures and old sheet music she wasn't going to play anymore. I would give anything to have those pictures. I don't have a single picture of Enfield relatives beyond my grandmother, Julia Enfield. And I know there were pictures there I would just give anything to have today. I keep newspaper articles. They aren't going to last forever. Maybe make a copy of them if there's something that was in the newspaper. I've been in the Free Press a couple of times. It's fun to be able to have something to show your kids what you did or why you were in there. There's one picture of me sitting on a cemetery bench at Glenwood Cemetery, where I'm now on the board. I used to take my sled and slide down the hill at Glenwood when I was little. That's a picture that I know they're going to read that article about how we went through and wrote down every tombstone in the cemetery, so you can go and find your person and know that they're buried there. Cemeteries are interesting. I hope we always have them. With so many cremations today and so many people's ashes getting scattered over some lake or something, you aren't going to be able to go and look at that tombstone. And that bothers me. History is something that never ends. As long as we're alive, you're making history every single day. So be sure you keep those memories, just like I'm trying to keep this one for you by doing this interview.